All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Between Two Ellens. We are honored this morning, afternoon, whenever we're recording, to have Aanahita Ervin from OK Policy here to talk about the budget. So welcome on Between Two Ellens.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So I just wanted to start off real easy. I said budget, but we also want to talk a little bit about taxes. So why is it important for people to understand tax and budget policy in our state?
That's a great question. And I think most people don't think it's important, which is a problem because tax and budget is how governments function. It's the core of what they need to do to function. Taxes bring in money, and budgets are the way governments spend money. So, as you said, yeah, we're going to talk about budgets, but you can't talk about budgets without talking about taxes. And so, I always tell people, I argue that this in and out of money, this influx and outflux of money is crucial to the function of government to maintain all the basic functions that they do. And if people don't often realize that tax and budget policy impacts every part of our social and political lives, the streets we walk on, the schools we attend, the libraries, the fire departments that we rely on, all of those are funded through budgets, whether it's local or state budgets. And we rely on those things and need those things to live a decent life. So that's why it's important. One thing I like to say that I read in this book called The Price of Democracy by Vanessa Williams. She argues actually that taxation can be an emancipatory act, which in our current anti-tax narrative sounds weird because people don't believe taxes are actually freeing. But think about it. If we are able to put our money together collectively, which is essentially what we do when we pay taxes. We say, hey, government, take our money and pay for all these things that we all rely on. We're able to access public education, which is huge for people to set up their lives, to be successful, to be free from any sort of oppression. And think about Social Security. When we're able to provide for ourselves, provide a financial cushion for ourselves in the future through Social Security, we are essentially making ourselves a freer people because when in our old age, we don't have to be a burden on our kids or society. That is why having a healthy tax system is necessary for the foundation of a healthy democracy. So, those are some of the reasons I would say taxes and budgets are crucial to our society.
I like how you said healthy tax policy because
Mhm.
sometimes, legislators have good ideas that they think about, especially about taxes, and
Mhm.
putting all that together and what it means, and is there can be some unhealthy tax policy as well. I don't want to start
Absolutely.
in too early on it, but I would like to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done in the past 5 years that is going to make it hard for Representative Poggemeller and I to support and fund services that we need. One of those things is a trigger, those trigger taxes, but also some incentives and things. So let's talk a little
Yeah.
bit about some unhealthy tax policy.
Sure. Do you want to? So I guess let's start with the big one. Yeah, income
Yeah.
tax cuts, the trigger provision that was passed last session by the legislature, which I don't know if you want me to go into detail about how it works, but essentially it leads us on a quote unquote crawl to zero, is what I like to say,
Mm-hmm.
which means that our state will eventually have zero income taxes, individual income taxes. And as you said, this is going to be very unhealthy for our tax system because that income taxes together, corporate and individual income taxes, make up 40% of our state's general revenue fund. 40% is a huge number, and it pays for a lot of things we rely on. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
agencies depend on that money. And so I think a lot of the time what's lost in unhealthy tax conversations is what are we going to do after that money is gone? Because
Mhm.
there's only two options. Either we raise other kinds of taxes, which some lawmakers have talked about, raising sales taxes, which is highly regressive, takes a huge amount of low income people's income to pay for services that everybody relies on. So it's forcing our society to rely on the most vulnerable people in our state. Or we can cut services, which again people rely on and will be devastating. Um, there's property tax cuts that are being discussed. I know that that's not a state revenue, but it's the crux of local government and county governments. And the majority of property tax funding actually goes to pay for public schools and vocational schools, which 85% of property taxes goes to pay in some counties for those services. So what are we saying in terms of how we value education, children's future economic potential? Workforce development without an education is really not possible. So yeah, there are a lot of bad ideas out there. But I do want to say, like, at the core of it is the conversation of why are property taxes so popular? Sorry, why are tax cuts so popular?
Mhm.
Because people are struggling. There's no doubt about that. People are struggling. There's an affordability crisis. People can barely afford to put the necessities they need on the table. But when it comes down to talking about how to solve that problem, that's where we have differing opinions and differing policy ideas. And rarely does Oklahoma talk about targeted ways to address those problems, like targeted tax credits that will actually give people money so that they can put food on their table and send their kids to school and afford childcare. And how about a minimum wage increase? All these things don't get discussed as popularly as tax cuts.
Yeah, I struggle with that a lot because the soundbite of tax cuts is so much easier than the explanation of, you know, targeted, whether that's relief for low income families or whether it's targeted to individuals who have the ability to afford paying additional taxes to support resources in our state. And so I sometimes tell people a lot, I wish we could figure out a different word besides taxes that wouldn't be so like people wouldn't like say like, oh, I
Right.
don't want to talk about that. Like I would a neutral word that feels like, oh, hey, let's talk about this, and then we can talk about it in a way that's, you know, provides more context. And so anyway, that's just something I think about. But like in Oklahoma, how does the budget process work? You know, how do legislators know how much we have to allocate, and where does that process begin?
Yeah. Um, so I think one thing to say up front is the budget process works in fiscal years, not calendar years. I'm sure you two know that. You guys go through this every year. And a fiscal year begins on our fiscal year, our Oklahoma State fiscal year begins July 1st and ends June 30th. So right now we are approaching the end of fiscal year 2026. And when session starts first week of February, the planning for fiscal year 2027's budget will begin. And I said that incorrectly. The planning for fiscal year 2027 actually began last July because state agencies begin the process by mapping out their own individual agencies' budgets, and they have to submit that to the Office of Management and Enterprise Services by October 1st. And that is one piece that is used by OMES. The second piece is in December, the Board of Equalization meets to discuss and create a binding estimate of the next fiscal year's expected revenue. So this is them determining by um, economic modeling how much money the state is going to have to spend in the budget. And they do this they use like some economist consultants from two different universities in Oklahoma. I cannot remember which one. I feel like one is UCO. And they present those budget estimates at the BOE meeting in December. And that is an estimate. So they meet again in February
Coming up.
to certify the total amount that will be available for the legislature to spend. And so, using the December estimates and the agency budget requests, the governor starts creating the executive budget, which is then presented in February. And that kicks off the legislative session during State of the State address. And so, then really, the budget process creation really kicks off when legislative session starts, when subcommittees and committees are starting to meet to talk about the different agency budgets. They're analyzing every line item and asking agency heads and lawmakers that are collaborating with those agency heads to ask, is this what we need to be spending on? What is that money for? How is it going to be spent? Is it one-time funding? Things like that. And I think the easiest way to explain this in normal speak is a budget is determining what is important and what isn't important. Because when you put money behind something, you're determining that that is important, and other policy ideas are not as important or effective in the legislature's mind. And I did not know this before I started this job, but the legislature's only constitutionally required job is to pass a balanced budget before session ends the last Friday of May. And I think that is really interesting because it's often that the actual budget deals don't happen until May. And so we have the entirety of 4.5 months to determine the budget, but the real decisions don't happen until the very end. And it's a very rushed process and not very transparent, not only for people in the public, but also for many lawmakers in the Capitol building, which I always like to point out to people.
Yeah, I think
The
one thing,
transparent word always gets me too, but go ahead, Ellen.
well, I was just going to say the other thing that you kind of mentioned is that, agencies submit their budget. And Ellen, you were in the meeting yesterday. I think I heard it somewhere, but where the agencies this year have asked for over $1 billion worth of funding. And we're looking at maybe $300 million that we're able to allocate out, that's keeping a flat budget and having like a very small percentage that we can add.
Right. So as you mentioned, usually the governor's office pressures agency heads to maintain flat budgets. But record-breakingly this year, all agencies combined are asking for $1.65 billion more than the 2026 budget. For context, our state's budget is about $13 billion. So that's a lot of money. That's a lot of pressure on the legislature. And I think that is even more so concerning given that there are these needs that agencies have to fulfill the services that Oklahomans rely on, and they're asking for more money and are showing that through their budget, yet we are cutting taxes and siphoning off the options we have for raising taxes because, again, State Question 640 restricts our legislature's ability to raise taxes because it takes a supermajority vote of 3/4 of the legislature to pass any tax increases. And I don't know of a group of people that agree to that degree.
Well, it's always interesting to, especially when we talk about this, there are some legislators that remember the teacher strike.
And that is,
And
yeah.
it's such and I'm happy that they still have that memory, but still we ended up, a lot of them, there were some that didn't vote for it, but about that tax, that trigger law. But I think that in the past, a lot of them said, I don't want to vote for a decrease because I said that I wasn't going to vote for an increase. And so a lot of that
Right.
sounds, I mean, we've already, decreased quite a bit. I was Senator Julia Kurt was telling me over the past 5 years with all of the tax cuts that we've done is like $1.6 billion. So where's that money that we're looking for extra? Well, we could have it if we would have assessed a little bit more instead of what we have to do is yearly budgets. I get that. Everyone should do it. But what we fail to do is because some of us are on a 2-year and 4-year cycle, is that we don't plan ahead to see what we're going to need. We couldn't have seen COVID when that came, or we couldn't
Right.
have known some of the budget, but we can plan and save And sometimes those rules are really hard to get some of that restricted money out to spend it. Could you talk
Right.
a little bit about that piece about the budget where restricted dollars, like people go, oh my gosh, you have so much in savings. But could you speak a little bit about the restrictive dollars in some of our savings accounts, rainy day being one, that there are only a few reasons, and as our um, A and B chair would say, both of them aren't good to to spend from that account.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact reasons, but so there's the FMAP. I'm trying to remember the acronym. There's a savings account for FMAP funding. Whenever the federal Medicaid FMAP, the federal Medicaid matching decreases, that savings is used to um, buffer that difference in funding so that we can maintain our Medicaid payments. So that's one restriction on that specific savings account.
Which it did go
Um,
down. So we're in that
right,
area. Yeah.
right. We will be allowed to use it, but that is part of the savings that is called on when the governor says we have record numbers of savings. That's included in that amount. There's the revenue stabilization fund that was created to I can't remember the rules on this. It was created to um, balance out funding that is lost when oil and gas prices drop. And then lastly, as you said, there's the rainy day fund. It takes, again, majority vote of the legislature or the governor can declare an emergency to use those funds. And the emergencies are not entirely clearly outlined. Sure, natural disasters are outlined, but I remember when last October, November, when the federal government said it was going to stop November funding for SNAP, there was a lot of conversations around does this constitute an emergency? And can the governor declare an emergency to use that money to ensure that people don't go without food for the month because the federal government decided they weren't going to fund a crucial program. So yes, there's specific restrictions on saving accounts in the state legislature that require a vote and can't be used for any and all purposes. Yeah, and I
You
think
kind of
a lot of people. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, one of the things you kind of mentioned is this other lingering piece of this is the HR1 budget that was recently passed. And, Oklahoma, although we don't like the federal government, we are sure as heck happy to take their money. And being a top 10 receiver of federal funding, that has propped our
Yes.
state up. And so, what kind of impact do you see for HR1?
Yeah. Yeah, you made a good point. Oklahoma is a top 10 receiver of federal funding. And I don't think we like to use that fact very often. But so the state's already struggling in their own budget, as we mentioned. Agencies are asking for more money. We don't have that money. We've cut taxes over the years. And now we have the passage of HR1, which has become deeply unpopular because it was a package of tax and spending cuts that has funneled more than $1 trillion over the next decade to large corporations and wealthy Americans, while simultaneously making historically sharp cuts to programs that provide family health care and food assistance. So it's the largest transfer of wealth from the lowest income people to the highest income people in our nation. And what this means for Oklahoma specifically is the way they're doing this is shifting cost from the Medicaid programs and SNAP programs that the federal government assists states in implementing. They're shifting a lot of those costs onto states. And so there's estimates out there that show the Medicaid costs, including work requirements, administrative costs, are going to cost the state of Oklahoma over the next 10 years $13 billion. Um, and so that begs the question of what's going to happen. The state can't afford to pay over the next 10 years $13 billion. And so the likely answer is service cuts. I mean, in a political, I think it was a Politico article, Senator Rader himself said, I think if we don't come up with money, we're going to have to cut these services. They're going to have to be eliminated. The SNAP cost shift, because Oklahoma has the largest, one of the highest error rates in our SNAP program, that puts us on a 15% cost shift, which means we will be on the hook for $224 million annually to ensure that the program stays where it's at. So that's a lot of money. And then those are just two programs. We haven't even talked about HR 1 changes a lot of the federal tax code, which then, because a lot of states base their tax code on the federal government's tax code, a lot of those changes affect our state's tax code. And so Oklahoma is on a rolling conformity, which means that if the state legislature doesn't take active decisions to decouple from the federal changes, we will automatically be adopting them into our state's tax code, and we will be giving large breaks to businesses, wealthy Oklahomans, and we don't have any estimates of how much that would cost. Not a lot of people are talking about that, and that is scary.
That
And one last thing I want to point out here, that yes, the federal government made these sweeping decisions, but the legislature does have power in deciding how to go about this. I mean, Colorado last called a special session in the fall to sort of deal with these conformity issues of the tax code and decide what they're going to decouple from so that they don't face large revenue cuts. And I think that's something that the lawmakers should be empowered by, and they should know that this is a great opportunity for them to take things into their own hands and set our state on a path that protects everyday Oklahomans rather than giving these large windfalls to corporations that are mainly out of state.
HR 1 has got so much in it, it's really hard to keep up with, especially
Yes.
because it is so big and people don't understand it, especially about, like, we're talking about a little bit of things about how our hospitals are going to struggle and the 13 billion. But like you said, that rolling conformity, that's not something that people are really talking
Right.
about. And it's not something that as legislators that we're really seeing as a need right now, because every day there's something that
New.
I believe that's an urgent priority that has to be done with money, but it's something to keep our eyes on. The understanding of Medicaid as well is so narrow, that people don't understand what it actually does and what actually is going to happen. I know we don't not even touching the fact of Medicaid that is for people, which is different than the expansion of Medicaid, which is mostly what is talked about in HR 1. And so we
Right.
get that all confused, but everyone needs to know, and I'm glad that you're talking about it, is less dollars federally coming into our state impacts our budget, which means that we have to make priority decisions. And sometimes what we talk about in the building isn't about food or our vulnerable adults, and about the necessary things we have to do with state matching funds. So it does affect our budget. We don't receive a lot of that Medicaid dollars, like you're talking about with the FMAT, until we budget it into our yearly budget. Talk to me about some of the things that, when you talk about the budget, do you believe that people have an understanding about the deepness of HR 1 and then even deeper Medicaid in trying to solve, fix, or, all those words that we hear? Can you talk to a little bit about that and see if there is a lot of understanding out there or not?
No, I mean, I want to be really real. I work in this policy area and I am struggling to keep all of it straight in my mind. I think that we all need to work together on this. We need state agencies to provide estimates of what these cuts are going to feel like for them and what programs are going to be impacted. We need um, fiscal analysts at the state legislature to help provide those estimates. Policy analysts like myself need to articulate more clearly and in like simple language what these different aspects are and what needs to be a priority when. But the unfortunate truth of the matter is, like you said, all of these are a priority now because a lot of these changes take place for fiscal year 2027 and 2028 onwards. So if we're not planning now, we will be late to the game. If we in session 2027 are not talking about the changes to our tax code, um, next session will be too late to actually try to mitigate those harms.
It's a very
That's
good
really,
reminder for all of us too, for me to, especially, thank you if you could help us make the
I would love
conversations a
to.
little bit clearer to the effects. Sometimes the things that we do, like we pass a budget and and sometimes our voices are heard a little bit on the minority
Mhm.
side that we are. But I do know that once that money gets spent, once it goes into the budget process, we don't have any control on how that actual
Right.
money is spent. So even some
Right.
of those conversations, people don't really understand about it, which means that, I don't know, I definitely could do a better job on that. And your help would be much
Um,
appreciated.
and I think that there's a part to somebody said the other day, this is why term limits in Oklahoma are so detrimental because a lot of that institutional knowledge is
Mm-hmm.
lost and the ability to say, well, we know this happened back in the day, we know how to deal with this. That expertise sort of needs to be relearned every time. And those relationships between state agencies and lawmakers need to be rebuilt every time. I know that Senator Paul Racino went to DC to try and get um, some leeway on the error rates to try and get Oklahoma's error rates down so that we don't owe so much in the cost shift. And he's asking for more time. And part of the reason is because he said the legislature wasn't aware of the assistance that the agency needed to reduce their error rates. So yeah, a lot of these conversations need to be happening back and forth. There needs to be a change of information because I don't have all the information. The lawmakers don't have all the information. Yeah,
One of the things I use OK policy all the time for
happy to hear that.
yeah, and mainly when I started working in nonprofit, I understood directly how those budgets impacted the agencies that I worked with. Because so many of them are in the field doing the work of the state, but being paid to do that work because our state agencies are not no longer leading those efforts directly.
Mm,
And so I think people don't understand like the shift of funding into we've shrunk state agencies, but we've outsourced a lot of that work into nonprofits, and those that funding does trickle down. But one of the things I recently was preparing for a conversation with some individuals who wanted me to talk about the budget, and on OK Policy's website they had basically if you compare the budget now to what it was in 2000,
yeah,
it was like $1 billion less with inflation than we invest now. And so I think sometimes people talk about this budget as big inflated, but if you look at over time, we have gradually uninvested year after year into core programs, and what we're seeing is the impact of that. And
yeah,
I don't, and so their perception is that that is government waste or failure, we're not doing our job. And it's hard to explain, no, we can, but the investment has to be long term, and
right.
agencies have to expect that funding and know that if we're going to tackle this issue in 2 years, we're not going to not tackle it anymore. Like, what are the real
Yeah,
priorities? And that long term investment is what makes a positive impact in communities.
absolutely. 100% agree with that.
The thing that people hear but don't really know about is exactly what you were talking about, Ellen, is that it's called maintenance of effort. And I remember 20 some years ago when I started advocating for Sooner Start, they would only just ask for maintenance of effort. And what that means is that the larger our population grew with all the babies we were having, we weren't doing a child find to find in that very beginning how that we should have saw ahead and goes, oh my gosh, if we have more babies, we know that a percentage of that is going to need some extra help and the mommies as well. And so we say maintenance of effort like we're fulfilling a mission, but what we're not doing is checking in on everyone that comes behind us. Um, I and I so maintenance of effort is something that I talk about. People don't understand what that means, um,
Yeah,
and
Yeah.
and especially since we talk about taxes and how they're impacting and the affordability, but you're right that we need to look at other things that are affecting individuals' budget, like's been brought up with insurance and I mean, price of food. You know, all of that is part of it. Here's my question. Spoke about regressive earlier.
Yeah, yeah,
I know that there is a candidate out there talking about consumption tax.
yeah.
Could
More
you,
than one.
yeah, could you tell us a little bit about some of the most equitable taxes and why consumption tax might not, would actually cause us more in our budget than it would in helping?
Yeah. So there's regressive taxes and there's progressive taxes. And progressive has nothing to do with the ideology. It's just the terminology used for taxes that take more as a percentage of income from higher income people than from lower income people. So everybody is paying taxes in progressive tax system. It's just more equitable and fair. And an example of that is a graduated income tax, where as your income increases, the tax rate applied to that income will increase proportionally. Um, that is, income taxes are a stable revenue source. They're equitable and fair. On the other hand, there's regressive taxes that namely is consumption taxes, sales taxes that take a larger portion of a low income person's income than a higher income person. So that means that if someone making $20,000 and someone making $120,000 both spend $5,000 on groceries a year, that $20,000 income individual, for them, that $5,000 is a larger portion of their income. And so they're struggling. And so if we're saying Oklahoma already has one of the highest sales tax rates in the nation when accounting for state and local tax systems, sales tax systems, at about 9%. We're the sixth highest in the nation.
Mm.
And when I hear lawmakers talking about shifting to higher sales taxes so that we can eliminate income taxes and property taxes, that's terrifying because not only will we be putting a higher burden on low income people, but a large portion of Oklahoma is rural. And I've heard a lot of, uh, I've been speaking to a lot of local officials in regards to the property tax conversations, and they are concerned about what will happen to their businesses if sales taxes are raised, because to begin with, they don't have a lot of businesses. People will not pay for more, and they would rather, if they're in the panhandle or on the near borders, they would rather go into other states and pay lower taxes. So we're losing our tax base even more. It's going to decimate rural economies. Um, and I think people think a sales tax is fair because, well, everybody's paying it on purchases they make. But when we really think about people's incomes and in proportion to that, it's really not fair. And we're asking lower income people to pay more of their income to pay for services that we all rely on. And it's just a really upside down tax system that is not sustainable. Not to mention that sales taxes are very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Not consistent.
Mm.
They vary a lot because it's dependent on consumer habits and the larger economy, and it's just not a sustainable way to maintain revenue for a government.
Consistent. That's always one of those things that when we talk about Oklahoma population, what we look forward for, we want to hear consistent. Um, it's so much to think about, especially since we're only a couple weeks away. And seeing
Yeah.
what those numbers are with the BOE, this last one will at least certify for us how much we have to spend.
Yeah. Yeah, we have $360 million more in the general revenue to spend, but overall, Oklahoma's budget went down by 600 and something million, which means that overall our budget is smaller than last year. And that's largely because we spent $1 billion from, I think, the capital fund, capital
Mm-hmm.
investment projects fund, and we got lower federal funding as well. So, yeah.
It's going to
Yeah.
be a tough year.
Whatever way you spin it, it's going to be hard this session, right, Ellen? It's going to be a hard session.
You did bring up something that following the budget with waiting list, I remember, oh gosh, so interesting. But it's something that I think we all need to think of, and I wish that collectively on both sides of the Capitol that we could think of,
Yeah.
and agencies, is that they each come with their budget, but how it affects other budgets because they have their individual priorities. I really wish that we could look at the budget like a puzzle, because
Yeah.
if we don't fund one as much, and lobbyists do their job of asking for certain
Right.
things for their clients or whatever too, so that's another piece that we don't talk about. But I really wish that all agencies could come together, and just say, where can we do the shift, where can we share, and what's that total picture for Oklahoma, because we don't, they silo everything.
Yeah.
Do you think a possibility, we have some legislators that really want to do some tax reform, if we could do a really great tax reform, well, the tax reform they're talking about you might not like, but if we talked about a tax reform that is a one small piece that we could do to have a really good effect on some future, what do you think that would be?
The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy released a report, I think, in 2023, and they estimated how much of a child tax credit increase each state would have to do to reduce child poverty by 50%. 50%. And it's not a small price tag, don't get me wrong. It's about $800 million. It's not a small price tag at all. But if we could reallocate money and create a large enough child tax credit to eradicate 50% of child poverty, I can't think of the ripple effects that would do for our economy, our workforce, children's health and nutrition, family well-being, financial security, like you name it, lower youth incarceration rates.
Yeah.
Like that would be one policy I would support and deeply look into, because a lot of it comes down to, again, is families not being able to afford the basics. And that's what a child tax credit helps families to do.
We love families in this state, right? That should be an easy
And children.
and
And children.
children.
I think that is something we do agree on both sides of the
Yes.
aisle.
Yeah,
That is
family.
something.
But yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh goodness.
Well,
So it's going to be a fun year, and I always say, if there ain't no getting, if there ain't no asking, of course. But I do really, and I know this sounds just so naive, maybe, but I do know that we can work really well together, and I think agencies and all of us, if we look at the budget, not as just transparent, but how it works together for that overall goal that we have for our state. And I'm even though we have to do it year by year, which I'm totally for, but planning is such a crucial thing that we have to look at. Look at our bridges. They put in that 7-year plan, and look where we are now. And so it is possible. And hopefully we're talking about literacy, and maybe we can all come together. Ellen's our guru on that is going to help our state with looking for a planning. And I don't know, I'm just so happy to talk about budget. Big fat nerd on this too. So thank you.
No, thank you. We need more budget nerds. We need more tax nerds. And I just want to say, like, I think there might be like fear or defensiveness from different parts of like stakeholders involved in the state's budget. And I think once those are overcome, like I do really believe that we want what's best for all Oklahomans. We don't want a system that is disproportionately like unequal.
I believe
for folks.
I believe that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the pod. As you know, we end our podcast with a question to the Ellens that we answer. So would love to hear your question.
Mine is not a very fun one, but it's with everything that's happened on the global stage, on the national stage, in our state, and like even Oklahoma City in recent months, in the past year at the very least. What is one thing that impacted you personally, and why?
Ooh.
Recently?
It could be as recent as yesterday, sure.
I mean, I always talk about disability, so I'll start there. Ellen, go
You
ahead.
go
You
first.
jump in. This is
No, you go first.
Let's hear it. Yeah.
I I for me, I think that there's a way that we can look at. I always say, if we look at the most disenfranchised and we support what that is with our policy, we will all be okay. And right
Mm-hmm.
now, there's this sort of, it's not fear, it's definitely an awareness, because I know that not only the history of disability in the US, but especially the history of disability in Oklahoma. And
Yeah.
there are some things that are happening that I think that we're moving back there. And
Yeah.
so, again, and it's not, I'm not afraid, because I have this job and I think that people don't know. And so educating is about that history is very important. So I know that's not probably, it's something I've done for, 20 some odd years, 20.
No, I
And
mean,
so I think
Medicaid changes.
it's always that continual movement of, even when change comes, I'm definitely systems change kind of person, but
Yeah.
I think that staying in the job, building relationships, not being transactional with what we do, I think that I'll still stick in there and still try to talk about what the needs are and what that history is, and not trying to go back there.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. I think one of the things that has just really not impacted me directly, but um, I had last April, I read the book, Everything Sad is Untrue, and I did a book talk on it 2 weeks ago. And the focus on the book is about a refugee from Iran who moves to Oklahoma and tells his personal story about both the hard um, truth of moving to this country. Also, the beautiful things that he left behind, which we don't talk a lot about in a refugee story. Um, and also the caring people that landed here in Oklahoma that, helped him be the successful person he was. And we had a book talk 2 weeks ago, and we actually had two refugees in our conversation telling their stories. And, one of them got really emotional. She wasn't expecting it. And they worked with the Sparrow Project, and Sparrow Project lost 90% of their funding. And when they tell their stories, part of the reason they landed in a safe place is because our government valued and believed in this idea that if you that we would care for you when we came over, when we made the commitment that you are welcomed and a part of our community. And that, to me, had always really been very broad in our country, and now that vision just keeps shrinking and shrinking of who deserves to be here. And that I'm born and raised in the United States, so that doesn't hit me directly, but it hits me directly in the view of what this country is. And so I don't know, I'm very much
Absolutely.
struggling with all of that right now and how we move forward. So
Okay, I do want to say, yes, the stories, and we hear them quite a bit, all across the state. But I have definitely, I don't know, actually, it's not hope I have, but I know that we have made some really good decisions in our state. I mean, talking about my son that's living his best life ever by understanding that there is a place for him after he graduates from high school, that mental health, if we work together, got to work together on that so that we can change it. So I just want to remain hopeful and support people. And I know that it's going to affect us in different ways, but again, I think that working with someone like you, Ellen, and you I think that means something. Andy, who's listening on with all that he's doing with the open primaries, I think there's such awareness now that I'm hoping that we can still keep moving. So
Yeah.
that
The
I'm
momentum's
not,
there for sure.
I'm trying to stay not hopeful. So it's probably the going to be the end of me with that. Too much hope, I guess. But
It's never a bad thing.
yeah, I do
Thank
think
you.
though it doesn't. I just don't hope it has to be a verb, so you have to keep doing things with it.
Right. Right.
keep showing up, keep informing us, keep educating. Like, all of it matters. So,
Well, when you come to the Capitol, come to the 5th floor and say hello, because if you
Absolutely, I will.
and then please, if there's a time that you say, hey, I've got something I want to talk about the budget. The HR1 is still in rule making right now, so a lot more can change with that. And so, like, as you know, we still don't understand what's going to come out of that, of HR1. We have an idea, but it's still it's still in some rules. So if you ever want to come back, we and have some news to share, please come back on
Absolutely,
Between
I would
Two
love to.
Ellens.